Public and judicial opinions are limiting doctrinal boundary setting for churches.
The American Religious Town Hall is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here is your host and moderator.
Welcome, viewers. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrea Luxton, and I am today's moderator. We have a very interesting conversation ahead of us, and I'd like the panelists to introduce themselves.
My name is Bishop Michael Olson, and I serve as the Bishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Fort Worth, Texas.
My name is Rabbi Dan Levin. I serve as Senior Rabbi at Temple Bethel in Boca Raton, Florida.
Hi, I'm Carl Trovall. I'm Professor of Ethics and History at Concordia University in Austin, Texas.
I am Mel Robeck. I'm Senior Professor of Church History and Ecumenics and Special Assistant to the President for Ecumenical Relations at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California. I'm also a minister of the Assemblies of God.
Thank you, panelists. And now to our topic for the day. In a recent LA Times opinion piece, the writers argued that, quote, religious organizations have an obligation to balance what they believe with a plural understanding of the broader public good, end of quote. Recent decisions made both by churches and by courts suggest that this question lies at the heart of discussions on religious freedom. Many Americans have accused bishops of weaponizing the Eucharist by withholding it when politicians speak or act contrary to the boundaries set by their own faith beliefs and teaching. At the same time, many Americans decry the recent action of the U.S. Supreme Court that allowed religious groups to stand within their belief boundaries when they refused to facilitate foster care to unmarried people and gay couples. So we would like to ask our panelists to consider the following questions. Question 1. Do religious groups in the United States really have the freedom to set and live by their own doctrinal boundaries? 2. Does the Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment obligate religious organizations to allow plural understandings of the broader public good? And thirdly, should religious organizations shift their doctrinal boundaries to fit ever-changing public opinion? And now let's go back to our panelists, and first of all, those that started the conversation.
Sure, thank you very much, appreciate it. I made my claim about that religious communities should be able to continue to set their doctrinal boundaries based on freedom of religion in America. Religious groups are private organizations. They should have the right to set the boundaries as they see fit for their own members, even sometimes when it's at an inconvenience for the rest of society. I would also hope that, though religious communities would do that they would always understand that they live in a pluralistic America, which means that there are other groups that have differences of opinion with them, and that, like we here have differences of opinion on a number of issues, we can listen to one another and talk to one another and contribute to the public good together, as I hope all religious communities could do. So I don't see them as necessarily being directly in opposition to one another. But it's the part of any group. I mean, I don't care whether it's a civic organization or anything. They set bylaws about how the members are to behave, how they're organized, what boundaries there are, who's a member, who's not a member. I mean, every community has the right to set that, however fluid or strict that they would like to be. I think that's part of the obligation in a pluralistic setting. I think one thing that oftentimes people don't understand is that while religious communities do have the right to set those boundaries, I hope that people would understand that for a lot of religious communities, our boundaries do change over time, because we understand that wisdom doesn't only come from the religious community alone, but could come from dialogue with other groups or other people, even people who have dissent within a community. If I could put it kind of bluntly, doctrine does change and shift over time. I mean, in just one example, I know the church body, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, of which I was a pastor in, changed its opinion about artificial contraception. It opposed it initially, and then over time, after study and information, decided that as long as it wasn't abortifacient, it was artificial birth control was okay. And so, I mean, this is just one example, but there are other examples as well. But I'll let you all continue the discussion.
Yeah, I think we live in a time when people are saying we don't like boundaries. There's an awful lot of people out there saying we don't like boundaries. We don't want this kind of control over us. We don't want that kind of control over us. But like you point out, I mean, every organization in a sense has its own bylaws and so forth. When you walk into a restaurant or you walk into a store, and often you see the sign right up front, we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone. Or if you walk into a restaurant in Southern California, beach time especially, no shirts, no shoes, no service. And now, of course, we're having the discussion about whether you have to have masks. Not only do we have to have masks, but starting this week, I think, we also have to demonstrate that we have proof that we have been vaccinated in order to sit in a restaurant or so forth. So it's a very fluid kind of a thing, but there are boundaries even in the secular society. Where I think where I have the most problem is when we have government, what I would call government intrusion into faith bodies, faith communities, which have certain understandings of life and death or certain understandings of behavior and so forth that we use to guide our own internal realities, but also we recognize that we speak over against the world in certain kinds. In other words, we're not there simply at the whims of the culture. The culture doesn't have the right to tell us this is what you will believe. Or, if the culture said all of a sudden to you, Dan, or to you, Madam Chair, no longer can you worship on a Saturday, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Or Friday night? You know, how is that going to affect you? Is that doctrinal decision that you're having violated, or is that something else? And I think that's what we're up against in a sense with this kind of what I would call the creeping intrusion of government into church life. Now, we have this kind of First Amendment freedom of religion, freedom to assemble, and all these kinds of things. But I do have the sense that it's being chipped away and chipped away and chipped away at the moment. And I think we need to be very careful about how far that can go and what kinds of things can be chipped away. What are we being required by the government to do that stands over against what our faith community believes are our boundaries?
Okay.
I would, and I hear exactly what you're saying, Mel, but in some respect, I'm not sure that I agree. In the Talmud, there's a sort of a provision in Jewish law that says dina de malchuta dina, meaning that the law of the land is the law. And that when there are certain doctrinal ideas that we have as a people that go against the law of the land in which we live, you got to follow the law of the land. And you're not allowed to stand in contradiction to what the law of the land is. So I believe very, very, very strongly that no one should be made to violate an element of conscience. But that also doesn't mean that you get to do anything you want.
Right.
So, for example, I might have a belief that gay marriage is a sin. But then I don't get to serve as the clerk of court because I'm not allowed to use my conscience to impose it on someone else. I might be a Jehovah's Witness or a Christian Scientist, and I may believe that blood transfusions are, I think you had said in an earlier program, Bishop, that some in those communities feel like that's almost like rape.
A violation.
A violation, right? And I may say that's not for me. And no one can force me to have a blood transfusion. But then I don't get to be the chief of the ER and say no one that comes into this hospital gets a blood transfusion. I think that, you're entitled to hold on to your rights, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you then have the freedom to impose that right necessarily on others. And I think that that's in some ways, I might keep kosher for myself and only eat kosher food, but I can't require you to serve me kosher food in whatever your public establishment is.
Right. I would agree with all of that. I think, though, the issue in the moderator's statement brought up the issue of communion, Holy Communion, and especially for Catholics, I think, is the only thing. And I honestly wonder, why is that a concern to non-Catholics? Why is that important? That's a matter of him and his faith with regard to the president or the speaker, all right? And that's a doctrinal matter. Now, the truth be known is that really, if he maintains his position on this and believes it's right, it's really his obligation to refrain himself from going to the Eucharist. Now, that's an internal doctrinal matter. It's not a political matter. Now, it has political ramifications. Of course it does. But it's not a partisan thing. And this is the type of intrusion that I see happening. Or they'll say, well, most Catholics don't believe that anyway. That's a sociological statement. That's not a theological statement and doctrinal. The other thing is the issue with regard to these sort of things is, for Catholics, is, there are, and I think this is true in principle anyway, is that there are more essential norms and then less essential norms. And, so, for example, that permit exemption. So, to your point, Rabbi, as far as about living by the law of the land, well, Catholics during Lent are obliged to abstain from eating meat on Friday, right, as an abstinence. But if they're in the military, and this is what they serve, the law itself dispenses from that because the common good of the force requires that. Well, that's different. That's a disciplinary law. That's different than something that is so closely tied to the commandments and the magisterium of the church of thou shalt not kill, all right, which is what the issue is here. Not just having an opinion, and with regard to the president especially, is that it's not just his own private opinion, is that he's telling Catholics, and he tells them this, that I'm a good Catholic. This is absolutely in consort with what a good Catholic does, and you should do likewise. That's where doctrinally he has far overstepped his bounds. It's not even saying, well, I'm privately opposed to this, and I have my own thoughts on this and stuff. That is not right. But it's a different statement than all of a sudden imposing and trying to change what we see as an essential doctrine regarding salvation, his as well as anybody else's. That's my concern. To me, it's like, why are we talking about this again? And it's fine we do. This is a forum for it, but it's an internal matter. I think I think that's part of what religious liberty is about.
Yeah, you also raise another question, and that is how does a faith community itself deal with dissent when you have kind of an official position and dissent within the community, and those members in the community are also members of society as a whole, and how do you struggle with that dissent?
Yeah, I think that part of what happens is when you have a religious organization that holds a doctrinal truth in one way, and society evolves to understand truth in a different way.
Or devolves.
Or devolves, depending on how you want to look at it, right? In either case, I think it behooves religious organizations to constantly be willing to reread their texts. And to constantly have enough humility to say, because we are all human, do we really see the truth fully the way we thought we had? And sometimes, for example, there are new truths that emerge that religious folks didn't see before. So 100 years ago in the United States, very good religious people could say, yeah, it's okay for a person with dark skin to have to drink from that water fountain as opposed to that water fountain, and that it was okay to make someone who had African ancestry to sit upstairs or use the back door. And then we realized, wait a minute, That's not what our texts teach. That's not what our truth and our understanding of truth evolves. If we're never willing to reread those or to try to evolve or devolve, but I'm going to go with evolve, we miss on our capacity to embrace greater truths.
Well, and with regard to that issue, was a greater reflection on the nature of the human person. You know, that there's an accidental difference, if you will, or really irrelevant for moral and social interaction of pigmentation and race. But with regard to the issue of human nature and science, what does science tell us about the embryo? We know more about the fact of the genetic identity and the DNA and the capacity that we have a human being at conception than we did, say, at the time of Aquinas, where the science told us, well, it's quickening is when you can date this sort of thing. Now that's science, all right? And that's not just a matter of my text says it's not good to kill an unborn child, all right? And though it does, all right, but it's also a sense of there's ramifications and is beyond that, and I think we have a responsibility for that. I think religious liberty, keeping with Dignitatis Humanae, at least from the Catholic perspective, with the Declaration on Religious Liberty, there's a freedom from coercion and freedom for being able to seek religious truth and to live the life. Now, you know, use the example as far as hospitals are concerned. You know, well, you know, if a Catholic hospital is governed by the ethical religious directives, the conscience exemption from after 1973 Roe v. Wade enabled Catholics hospitals say, no, you cannot, you don't have to perform these, you know, sterilizations especially or abortions, but you can't fire somebody who on their own time does that. Well, I think that's a conscience exemption, and I think that's a good recognition of that, at least for the time being. But to compel or coerce somebody to do something that is contrary to their conscience and to the teachings of the gospel as they understand it, and also as they've upheld it for 2,000 years. So, for example, with regard to adoptions. Well, if you know the law mandates adoptions, well then we're not going, you know, to same-sex couples. Well, we don't have to do that. Then we get out of the adoption business, and it's fine. Or other issues, then fine. But it's going to end up being where there's a new religion of liberty, all right, that replaces and it ends up coercing others to follow it or to shut down. There's more to religious liberty than just the freedom to worship as one sees fit.
Absolutely.
And I'm afraid that that's become a dominant thing in our popular culture.
Absolutely. I would agree with that, that no one should be compelled necessarily to violate something that they find to be doctrinally true. But at the same time, when the right of someone to not be compelled impinges on the right of somebody else to human dignity, then I think that there needs to be ways to set aside or to say, well, then you are in the wrong business. So, for example, if my religious identity teaches me that I can't serve someone of a particular racial background, I can't compel someone to change their belief. What I can say is, you got to get out of the restaurant business. Because the right of a person to be treated with human dignity irrespective of their racial background is greater. And there is a compulsion that we need to say that, yes, and I think that there may be a time where you say to somebody, we cannot compel you to go against your religious beliefs, but that might mean you need to get out of the adoption business.
Well, but there's also, you know, the issue of race is a different issue than inherently evil actions, like same-sex actions that between unnatural acts between two men or two women, and those relationships which have long-standing been not just because of tradition, like, well, we've always done it this way, but are really inherent to the gospel as we understand it as a church, and also, frankly, that are in a sense unchangeable.
All right, I'm going to have to pause you there because we are time
Right.
for a break, but we'll come back and can continue your thoughts after that. Fascinating conversation. Thank you. Let's have the commercial.
We hope you're enjoying today's program. If you'd like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the vision and history of the program, and we invite you to become a ministry partner, explore our Town Hall Estates healthcare facilities, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, we look forward to receiving your letters. You may write us at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. If you have a prayer request, please send it to prayerrequest@americanreligious.org. Thank you for writing and thank you for watching. Now, back to today's closing statements.
Welcome back to a very energetic and lively conversation today, and we are going to move into our concluding statements from our panelists. Bishop Olson.
This conversation has helped my understanding of religious liberty to evolve. And to say ever more clearly that religious liberty involves both a freedom from coercion and a freedom for. And I think precisely the experiment that is the United States of America as we've known it has allowed these sort of discussions, debates, and policy decisions to really happen in freedom and directed towards not only individual flourishing and sectarian integrity, but also hopefully for the common good of society, especially when it comes to service to our neighbor, alleviating suffering, eradicating poverty, and also enlightening the ignorant through education.
Well, after the two of you have discussed this so intensely, it's hard to know exactly what a summation might look like. Although I think that the fundamental principle that one has the freedom to live out the nature, even difficult kinds of. I was thinking of Jehovah's Witness. If a person wants to refuse blood transfusions for themselves, that's one thing. Yeah. But of course, once you begin imposing that on other people, then it becomes problematic. So I still though think that religious communities still fundamentally have the right and the obligation to set their own kinds of internal standards. And I think that people who are members of those communities need to wrestle with those, and they need to speak and the discernment of the Spirit in those communities about change. But in a pluralistic community, I think there are those rare occasions when the government may have to impose. I mean. Talk about racial equality, when the government does have to impose certain standards on religious institutions. But I think that has to be done very carefully and with a lot of conversation and thought so that we're understanding one another.
Yeah. I want to come back to Dan's disagreement with me. I mean, in a sense, I hear him saying something different, but at the same time, I don't think we are saying a lot different. I mean, the texts don't change. The interpretations often do. And, you know, my concern with this particular show and this particular topic is that I feel more and more the pressure from public that is not related to our church or to any Christian religion or even to Judaism, pushing to force us to change the way we think and what we believe in, and I think that's absolutely wrong. That's the coercion side, Bishop, that you brought up a little bit earlier. I think we do have the freedom, but we also have the responsibility always to be asking ourselves, this is the reinterpretation or the reassessment of current interpretations, are we correct in the way we understand that text? That text was there to communicate a reality that we're supposed to follow.
Part of what I love about this panel is that we can enjoy these kinds of conversations where we don't necessarily have to see eye to eye.
Yep.
I strongly support the idea that anyone in any religious sect should be entitled to their doctrinal beliefs, and that no outside entity should force that religious organization to alter those beliefs. At the same time, I think we have to be careful to make sure that religious organizations don't impose their beliefs on a broader society that may not share them. So, for example, if the Catholic Church says we don't believe that gay marriage should be sanctified, no one should force the Catholic Church to sanctify gay marriages. However, if two gay men say, my religious beliefs believe we can form our household this way, then the Catholic Church and its adherents should not stand in the way of another religious organization to say we will sanctify that union in that household.
Absolutely.
And I think that's where American life is so precious. Because we preserve this freedom for religious understandings. And sometimes it happens that because of people voting with their feet, walking out of a particular religious organization by saying your doctrinal beliefs no longer square with the way that my religious identity looks at the world, it forces us to reread those sacred texts and to say, are our truths still true and we're being devolved? Or is it that maybe I need to reconsider truths that I thought I knew? And I think so long as we all keep our minds and our focus on human dignity, on equality, on freedom and equal protection, our society will continue to evolve as a holy society, one that protects that sacred right of religious freedom of expression and belief.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Listeners, viewers, I suspect that you have a number of questions in your own mind after today's conversation. And I do hope that you continue with them in your own faith communities, continue them with your friends and across faith communities. Because I think it is a really important question for us to look at, that sense of our own freedom as faith communities, but also the freedom of other groups as too. How do we make that work? And sometimes they will clash. They won't all neatly always stay apart. And when there clashes, that's of course where you begin to get your problems. So please do make contact with us. Do share your opinions with us. We would love to hear more from you. But as for now, the Charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. And now, friends, until next week at the same time and over the very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you.